very small pub gig, probably one of the smallest pub gigs I've ever done. And the fee was quite a bit lower than I'd usually take now. But I was actually really nervous for it because I don't know if anyone else has done this, but this was essentially a redemption gig. So I was doing a gig where now I'm doing it professionally now, and I had to prove to the guys, yeah, I'm not that same guy that you experienced all those years ago. I'm like an absolute dapper now. So I came into the gig. And like I said, it's a really small venue, nothing to get too excited about, but I was nervous about it. And that for me was a big gig.
Hi and welcome to Big Gig Energy, a podcast by musicians for musicians, helping you get bigger gigs, no matter what level you're at. I'm your host, Steve Leggett, and with 10 years experience as a professional musician, doing everything from pubs and functions to travelling the world in a ukulele boy band, I understand that being a musician is rarely the glamorous experience people make it out to be, and that building your career up to a point where you get to go pro is about the most challenging professional leap of faith there is. But I'm going to use my experience and insight, and maybe a guest or two, to help you activate your own big gig energy and take things to the next level, whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out. So, let's get to it.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of Big Gig Energy. This will be our second interview episode, and we've got the pleasure this week of being joined by a friend of mine. I've worked with him for getting on for 5 years now, mostly with the Funtime Frankies, a function band, the awesomest function band in the Northwest, if not the whole of the UK. But I've also worked with him on other projects, such as the House Band in Detroit Bar and a couple of scratch bands over the years as well. Matt's an experienced drummer and one of the nicest people I've come across in show business. He's a real pleasure to work with, and we get some really interesting insights over the course of this episode on exactly what it takes to be a great musician, besides just being a great musician. So without further ado, live from Rock Hard Studios in Blackpool, my interview with Matt Chung. So I'm here today at Rock Hard Studios in Blackpool with Matt Chung, drummer extraordinaire. Thanks for joining me, Matt.
Thanks for having me, Steve, from one legend to another.
Oh, you're too kind. So, how did you start off? What brought you into music? How did this all come about?
So when I was a kid, a little background about my life. So I lived in Hong Kong when I was a kid, and then when I moved to Glasgow, because that's where I'm originally from. When I was in primary school, I was just in I can't remember. I think it was a maths class or something. That doesn't matter. But I remember this guy walking into my maths class, just this random dude, and he just looked at me and was like, yeah, I want you and this other person to go into a different room. And I was like, I don't know what's happening now. So anyway, the teacher was like, yeah, cool, you guys just go off and do whatever. So, I was a bit like, oh God, what's about to happen? Turns out he was actually the primary school's brass teacher. And so just to give you some background again, I wasn't really into music at that time either. I remember I was a weird kid. I remember thinking, why do people like music? Why do people like money? Why is that a thing? But yeah, so this brass teacher, John was his name, he introduced me to the trombone. And I actually took to it really well, to be honest. So how old was I? I was 9-10 years old when I started trombone. And I was classically trained back in the day. And then that went into, I went professional at a really young age on the trombone, because I was playing with Glasgow Symphony Orchestra when I was 12, 13. So I was like the youngest member by like a decade or two. It was pretty mental. And then I was like, yeah, kind of like music now. And then I reached high school, and that's where it went all downhill because I saw the drum kit. And, just like a lot of kids, they're just like, oh my God, a loud instrument. I want to play that. That's such a cool instrument. I was like that, but I was also like, no, it really is cool. I want to take it over my trombone skills.
Yeah.
So that kind of happened. And then when I started drums, I started doing less on the trombone. So when I moved down to England, I kept doing drumming stuff, mainly in school and everything. And then when I got to uni, I met some of my closest mates I've got for life now, and one of them was actually drumming in a cover band. And I said to him, I was like, mate, that sounds like a dream. That sounds amazing. And how old was I? I was 22 at the time. because I've never done anything like that. I was like, mate, that must be amazing getting paid some pretty decent dollar to go gig and just have a party.
Absolutely,
And
yeah.
and I was like, that's amazing. And then, we finished uni, and keep in mind, I haven't done like gigs outside of school and everything, or uni. And then a year after I finished uni, I then got a call to do a gig, and it was purely from a recommendation, which was, I don't know if you've heard of it, but it was basically an Amy Winehouse tribute called Lioness, the Amy Winehouse Experience.
Of course.
And what happened with that is that, so that was technically my first gig, really, because I never really gigged before that. Again, I'm a really late bloomer, so I think at that point I was 25, 26, I think. And, like a lot of people that I gig with now, they've been gigging since they were early teenagers, and I envy that so much. But I don't regret anything, I've lived my life and everything. So I got this call, and it turns out that the reason I got the call was because the manager was actually one of my college teachers back at Blackpool in the Fylde College. And he knew that I was actually an okay drummer, and he needed one, and he knew that I'd be relatively free for it. And I was like, mate, that's amazing. Yeah, and then I remember him telling me it was like 3 figures, and for someone who's getting basically nothing, I was like, that sounds amazing. Oh my God, 3 figures, making that past 100. Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, so that's how I got into gigging. I was really late, and then it just skyrocketed from there, really.
That's interesting. That starting off from an orchestral background, I suppose really you did start quite early on. If you're playing with an orchestra early on, just on a different instrument, how do you find the difference between the orchestral setting and presumably written music, and then what you do now, mostly in covers bands and?
Oh, they're literally worlds apart. So I'll take you back to high school, because it's a very specific moment that happened to me where I realized, yep, these are not the same thing. So when I reached high school, so I was, again, like I said, I was still with my primary school brass teacher called John, and he was like classically trained. He was awesome. And then when I was going to high school, he said, oh yeah, I know another guy also called John, but he's like a jazz trombonist. So when you get there, I'll introduce you to him and get a few lessons on that side of things. And I was like, okay, I know nothing about jazz, but yeah, sure, why not? And I remember meeting John for the first time, the high school one, and he invited me to join the jazz band. And it's just that type of gig where you get the dots in front of you, the sheet music, and you just read it and do the gig. And at that point, I was a very avid sight reader. I was like, yeah, mate, no problem. I'll do that fine. Nice. So I remember coming in with my trombone, just getting set up. Everyone was talking to each other. I was a newbie. And then I started playing it. Keep in mind, I've never played jazz before. Playing it, got to the end of the song, and John, I remember he just walks in the room, and he looks like your stereotypical jazz music teacher. He's got the circular black sunglasses, long slick black hair, waistcoat, just so typical jazz teacher.
Yeah.
And he just goes up to me and says, oh mate, you've played it all wrong. And I'm like, no, I didn't. The sheet music's right there. I'm reading it. And he was like, no. So it swung. And I was like, what? Because I didn't really know what swung was at the time anyway. So swung, and then improvisational things in the songs as well, because there would be bits in the sheet music that would say improvise. I didn't realize that had anything to do with me, because in classical sheet music, you have to stay to the script. Simple as that. You just read it. Cool, you get to the song. Great, next song. Read it, end song, whatever. With what I got given, you have to improvise a lot. And the guy said that I had to use it more of a guide than anything, because sometimes they go off script, and that sent me sideways. I was like, oh, I'm not used to this. And it really challenged me. And that, in a way, really helped me getting to drums as well. Because I remember when I got into drumming around the same time, me and my mates all in school, like, we'd just jam with each other. And improvising was such a big thing. Because at the time, Red Hot Chili Peppers were massive. They just released Stadium Arcadium.
Yes.
And that was playing everywhere. And me and all my mates all loved that music. So we were like, oh, mate, we're going to make the next Red Hot Chili Peppers. And we just started jamming stuff out. And And I'd like to think that the reason I was so good at improvising at the time was because of that jazz teacher that showed me, like, no, you have to be off script sometimes with other sorts of music.
Just opened you up to that whole other thing.
Yeah.
I find it really interesting, that dichotomy between the sort of the written music and the improvised music. And you often see it with classical players where exactly like happened with you say, take a solo, and you can just see the gears grinding and things. It's fascinating sort of having played with you recently, with you on drums, me on bass, and knowing how you are now and how you can just completely improvise anything. It's amazing that you've swung from that and you've actually broken out of, presumably you can still read now?
So with trombone music, so I started reading trombone music in treble clef,
Right.
and then I got transitioned over to bass clef. I don't know the age. I don't think that matters anyway. And then I got showed how to read tenor clef and alto clef, which are really cool. Like I admire people that read those sort of music, and I could sight read it back then. Because I don't really play trombone anymore, I can't really sight read that sort of music, but being able to read stuff like the time signature, the rhythms of the music really helped me to learn drum music as well. I was able to read drum music, the rhythms anyway. The only thing I had to get my head around when I was reading for the first time was I'd have to get my limbs to do different things, because it's like piano music. I don't know how pianists do it right, but they're reading like 4 notes at the same time and they're using separate fingers, and I'm like, I don't know how you're doing that. Like, let alone, like, I'm doing it with 2 hands more or less. Well, 4 limbs, but still. But yeah, no, so that helped me into reading music, really.
Nice. And then it just helped you transfer as well. When you took up the drums, you were able to sort of read the music to get started, and then obviously inspired by the Chili's, you were able to sort of learn to improvise a bit more. And
oh yeah, like as soon as I started drums, like I said, I started learning how to read music, and at the same time, Red Hot Chili Peppers helped me with the improvising side as well. So
I love that because Stadium Arcadium, that was the album that got me into bass originally as
well.
well.
Nice.
Yeah. That was. I think I was aware of them. There was a lad in my school that could play Can't Stop, and I remember seeing him slapping that and just going, "That's cool." And then when Danny California came out, I was like, right. I played jazz piano at the time, and I was like, no, bass. This is it. I'm going to be a bass player. So that's cool.
Nice.
Amazing how things can come along and just sort of inspire people at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's sort of looking back at their catalogue, it's not their sort of biggest release. It's not like Californication or, by the way, one of their biggest ones.
No, but obviously looking back now, the marketing team at the time did a really awesome job, because I remember being in Italy, and Stadium Arcadium was only just released, and it was Danny California was being played everywhere. But yeah, no, the marketing team was fucking top notch.
Yeah, it was a cracking release.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, wow. So obviously, as you moved into the drum scene and things like that, one of the key questions I ask everyone, I'm going to be asking everyone on this podcast, is just sort of, what to you is a big gig? What makes a big gig to you?
So, obviously, I'm going to assume that because you're asking different people this, they're going to have different answers. And I have a very specific answer for this, that other people might not agree with. That's fine. So what I consider a big gig is gigs that I actually get nervous for. So it doesn't matter, to me anyway, if it's like a stadium. If I'm not nervous, it's not really a big gig because it just feels, like you're just playing kind of thing. But if I'm nervous for a pub gig, for example, that's a big gig for me. So I'll give you an example if that's okay.
Far away, yeah.
So basically, one of my very, very first, not very first, but early dep gigs back in the day, my drum dep gigs, I gigged with a ska band back then. And again, I wasn't a depper. I was very new to it. So understandably, I didn't do a good job. And plus, I was really young as well in the gigging scene anyway. So, I never got the call back. That's fine. You just move on and just do whatever. That was also a recommendation by my college teacher because he was actually the drummer for that band.
Nice.
So anyway, last month, God, time flies by. So last month, I get a call from the singer of that ska band saying, oh, hey, I've just talked to this person. Turns out that person was Stu. Stu was the bass player for Miami Winehousing. And apparently they were in a project together, and they were talking, the singer was saying, yeah, I'm really struggling for a drummer for this gig coming up on Saturday. And Stu was like, have you asked Matt? And Joe was, well, I don't know what he said, but I can only assume it's, yeah, we did have him before, but he wasn't, up to scratch. And Stu, what a legend, he said, yeah, I do understand that, but Matt was new to the gigging scene. Now he's an absolute professional and he's got a great work ethic. Flattering to hear that. And the singer was just like, yeah, cool, I'll give him a call then. So I get a call, and I'm like, yeah, I'm free this Saturday. Awesome. Yeah, whatever. It's a local gig. It's literally a 7-minute drive for me. Absolute dream. And again, it was just a very small pub gig, probably one of the smallest pub gigs I've ever done. And the fee was quite a bit lower than I'd usually take now. But I was actually really nervous for it because I don't know if anyone else has done this, but this was essentially a redemption gig. So I was doing a gig where now I'm doing it professionally now, and I had to prove to the guys, yeah, I'm not that same guy that you experienced all those years ago. I'm like an absolute dapper now. So I came into the gig, and like I said, it's a really small venue, nothing to get too excited about, but I was nervous about it, and that for me was a big gig, and I can understand why that's not other people's big gigs, but yeah, so gigs that you feel nervous about.
How did that gig go though?
It went surprisingly well, considering that I had about 24 hours to prep all the material. So understandably, since the first time I played with them, I forgot all the songs.
Of course, yeah.
No, 24 hours to learn it. So what they usually do, I think, is that they usually rehearse with a dep drummer, which is fine. Each band can do it their own way. I usually just come to the gig and just do the gig. And yeah, they were... It was interesting, actually. So when I arrived, I saw some old and new faces, because understandably over that time they might have changed members and all that. And all the new members like, oh, hey, I've heard so much about you. You do like function gigs and everything, don't you? And I'm like, yeah, just keeping conversation. And then I see the older faces, and they basically go, oh, hey, you're right. Yeah, we'll, babysit you throughout this whole gig, which is fine, because I'm not gonna lie, dude, I set the bar very low because I was not good back then.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, whatever. And then I remember we were doing sound check, and one of the guys just says to me, yes, when we do a sound check, we'll just do a verse and a chorus. And I'm just there like, yeah, I wasn't expecting to do the whole song anyway, but yeah, sure. But I didn't say that because you've got to be nice about that sort of thing.
Right, yeah.
So I was like, yeah, cool, that's fine. Thanks for telling me. So we do the sound check, and a few of the guys look back to me and are like, oh my God, if you're going to be playing like that tonight, we're in for a good gig, because that was tight. And I was like, oh, cheers, man. I'm really thankful for that. I'm, really thankful to be playing with you guys in the first place. So we do the first set. I mess up on one song because it's one of the songs where it's so repetitive, and I had my notes on me, so I just misread my notes, and I ended the song a little bit early, but nothing that the crowd could notice anyway. So that was all fine, first set. In the interval, I remember a couple of them were joking like, oh, we're looking for a full-time drummer, ha ha ha, and I was like, aha, really funny.
Yeah.
And then second set, did the second set, all perfect, and then I was in the dressing room, and I didn't know where the rest of the guys were. And I was like, that's fine, I'll just get changed in my clothes. 15 minutes later, they all come in. And some of them said to me, they're like, yeah, so we've just been thinking, would you actually be up for doing this full time?
Amazing.
And immediately I said to them, I was like, guys, I'm so flattered that you've asked me this. I'll have to double check my diary and everything, because as you know, I do function gigs and I do dep other gigs. So I don't know because the last thing I want to do is take on a gig full time and then let them down because I'm doing another gig already. So yeah, so that's that story.
That's amazing, because that's the dream of so many musicians, because we all did it. Like, I remember when I first started out gigging, sort of after I left the ukulele band, like my first few function gigs, it's a whole other world away from what I was used to. And I did a couple of gigs that I'm not particularly proud of. And it's like the dream for so many people to have one that they were still finding themselves, and then be able to go back and basically redo it and have a second shot and then smash it as they are now. That must have been such a great feeling to do that.
Yeah, like I said, I don't really know many musicians that have that redemption gig, as I'd call it.
Yeah.
Redemption gig.
Redemption, yeah.
But yeah, no, I was so thankful to have that opportunity. And yeah, it just shows that over time you just get better, even without knowing about it.
People forget that. I think sometimes you work with someone and they've not brought their A game or whatever, and you think, well, there's a lot of people out there, supply and demand. I'm not going to ask them again. And you forget that people do get better. So even if you have someone on that's not ideal, in a few years' time, you almost need to sort of have like a short-term memory with depths and just go, well, yeah, they might have got better. That said, I've worked with some people that have clearly been doing it for far too long and still haven't quite figured it out. So,
Yeah.
without naming names or anything. But yeah, it's an interesting one.
It's interesting because in terms of depping, I only think that playing good is actually half the job, to be honest.
So what would you say to somebody looking to get into being a professional musician and to sort of basically gig for money? What would you say is like your main piece of advice for someone in that position?
So like I said before, you can be a monster player and not have the attitude or the niceness or anything, but you'd probably never want to work with them again, because when you're on a gig, they don't make working with them nice, to be honest. So when I'm on a gig, I'd like to think that I'm a generally nice guy anyway, even off stage.
You absolutely are.
Cheers, mate. But when I'm setting up for a gig, as soon as I've done my thing, I'm constantly asking other people, do you want help with anything? I get duct tape out. I start duct taping all the cables on the ground. I'm asking people, do you guys want anything to drink? Do you want a hand with that? Do you want me to lift anything? And then just general conversation, to be honest, because I am quite a curious and chatty person anyway.
Absolutely.
So I generally want to know what's going on with the lives and everything. Obviously, they don't need to tell me, and if so, then we'll talk about work.
Yeah.
And like I've heard through the grapevine that people have said, Matt Chung, he's a super nice guy, by the way. And I'll be honest, I think that's the main reason I get my gigs, to be honest, is because I'm just I like to think I'm just generally nice and nice to be around, to the point where people are like, we've got Matt Chung on the gig. Awesome, this is going to be a great gig because he brings such a good vibe to him. Vibe is everything.
Absolutely.
Vibe makes the atmosphere. And if you have someone like that on stage with you and off stage, the whole mood of the whole gig would just elevate the next level.
Completely. And the fact that you're a shit hot player doesn't help at all.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, it's true. You are always an absolute pleasure to work with, and you're exactly like that. You're always, if there's something you can do to help when you set up, you're always jumping in. You're always asking how everyone's doing. It's little things like that do make such a huge difference to that. And again, if you're looking to book someone for a gig, people like yourself are going to be at the front of your mind that are just nice to be around, because at the end of the day, you're going to be chatting more around a gig than you are actually playing together. Typical gig, you're playing for 2 45-minute sets. You're going to get there a couple of hours before. You're going to be an hour after that packing down. There's going to be a break in between. All of those points, you need to be able to hang out in a nice way. And just being decent and help with that.
Yep. So be a nice guy.
Love it.
Or girl. So I do believe that having that niceness about you goes a very long way. And like that brings me back to actually about my college teacher, who got me in the Amy Winehouse thing in the first place, because I was a goody two shoes back in college, and I was a really good student as well, and he obviously remembered that, and he knew I was a good drummer. I wasn't amazing, but I was a good drummer. But he was planning big things for the Amy Winehouse thing, and he carefully selected all the other musicians because everyone else was super nice. They were. And some of them have vast experiences beyond me, but overall they were really nice guys, and I do appreciate that. So
it's definitely an important thing people underrate, I think, when selecting people. You want, more than anything else, you want to hire someone based on the fact they're going to be a good hang. Like if you're going to be stuck on a tour bus with them, or stuck in a green room with them, or generally around them for the extent of time you have to be in our line of work, you've definitely got to pick the people. Almost it's more important than how well they can actually play, of just having people that are dead sound to be around. And obviously, if like yourself, they're a monster player as well, it doesn't half help.
I'll give you a really quick example as well. Was it last week I was gigging with you, or the week before?
I want to say last week.
Okay, we'll say last week.
Let's go with that.
Yeah. I remember looking at who was on the gig, and it was me, yourself, and another singer. And I remember thinking, I was like, oh my God, Steve's on the gig. This is going to be such a chill gig. And like always, like you just help out, you just get into the job. You were asking us if we wanted any drinks, really small stuff. And even when you set up your stuff, you'd come over and ask the rest of the guys, do you want any help with anything else? Just little things like that make a massive difference. And I appreciate that so much, Steve, and from anyone else.
You're
So,
too kind.
yeah.
You really are. But it's good because obviously that was the Funtime Frankies last week we were with. But like, how many bands are you currently working with? Like, is there a set number of main characters?
I get random calls from like one-off gigs. So I think, so at the minute I'm just trying to think what's in my diary. This is a challenge from my memory. So like you said, you've got the Funtime Frankies. Got quite a few gigs with them this year. I've got another few gigs with that ska band that I mentioned before. I've got 2 other function bands that I dep with that I've got later this year. And like you said at the very beginning of this podcast, we're at Rock Hard Studios where I work during the week, and sometimes we get drum recording sessions where I'm needed for session drumming. Sometimes I just get a late minute call. Like for example, a couple of days ago, I got a call saying, "Hey mate, are you free tomorrow?" "Yeah, I've got a gig at a pub." And I'm like, "Yeah, awesome. Who's on the gig?" "I know the 2 guys." "Oh, awesome. Yeah, cool. I'll see you there." Get there, pick some songs, scratch band. And that's what I love about those kind of pub gigs, because anyone can be on those gigs. You just it's a really relaxed vibe. You have a fun time. Awesome.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. Getting the phone call, just like, "You free tomorrow?" It's like, "Yeah, I am." "All right. Yeah. Who are we on with? Let's do it." And yeah, when you get to that point, there's enough repertoire down and you can just literally go scratch band, make the set list up as you go. It just makes it so much easier, doesn't it? And
100%.
so going into sort of the musical side of things, have you got any main influences on the kit itself?
So back in high school, when I was with my drum teacher, he was teaching this kid a couple of years above me, and he was teaching him this really complicated song by a guy called John Schofield, and the drummer was Dennis Chambers, and he's an absolute beast on kit, really. He influenced me in a lot of ways that I didn't realize, to be honest. Like his whole kit setup, the way his technique, the way that he plays the kit, as in like he does a lot of singles, and that influenced me a lot more than I realized. So stuff like Dennis Chambers, obviously we mentioned Stadium Arcadian before, so Chad Smith,
Of course.
and then because I was really curious about the drum scene as well, I just got in the nitty gritty of all this. So there's a million drummers that I went through phases with, but it would have to be Dennis Chambers, Chad Smith, Tony Royster. Trying to think. No, I think that's probably it, really. Oh, maybe Vinny Caliuta. He's an awesome player as well.
What sort of background's he in?
He's very mixed.
Right.
He's like the session player. So he plays in everything. I've heard him play jazz, fusion, funk, math rock. He's an absolute pro. But Dennis Chambers is probably my main one, to be honest. He's always my go-to. And when I listen to him play So You Say, that's like a kind of funk fusion kind of thing. And that obviously tied in well for me wanting to improvise funk and everything.
Of course.
Back in the day, yeah. So that's who I probably really idolize, to be honest. Dennis Chambers. What a legend.
That's brilliant. So, yeah, I guess we sort of get to that point. The final question I ask everyone on this podcast is just sort of off the top of your head. Doesn't have to be the greatest album of all time or your favorite album of all time, but just what's an album you'd recommend?
So it's interesting actually, because when I listen to albums, there's usually, I probably like about 90% of all the things, and that's fine. You don't have to like all the songs.
Of course.
However, there's one album that I've listened to all the way through, and I loved every single moment of it. And it's actually an album by Wolfpack.
Nice.
Called it's not called anything. It's just called Live at Madison Square Gardens.
Right.
And that's an awesome album. I've listened to it again and again. And what I love about it is just the general vibe of it, because everything is really peaceful. the niceness of it. You can tell that they're all nice guys, and that comes across as well, because they do meditation halfway through the gig, and it's amazing.
That's brilliant.
And then again, it comes back to my funk background. They're obviously the kings of funk at the minute. But yeah, I would recommend that massively if you're into that style of music.
That's so good, because I love Wolfpack, but I'm ashamed to say, bit of a terrible Wolfpack fan. I've not actually listened to that one all the way through yet. I've heard it's amazing from so many people. You are just the latest, and a long line of people have said you should check this out, and for some reason I haven't yet.
Oh, dude, you're going to have an amazing time. I wish I could listen to it for the first time over and over again, but yeah, you're going to have a good time if you listen to it.
That's my car back playlist, I think.
Yes,
sure.
definitely.
I'll get that on. Oh, that's amazing. Well, Matt Chung, thank you so much for coming on Big Gig Energy. It's been a real pleasure having you here.
No worries. Thanks for having me. I'm privileged that I'm even on this.
Oh, no. Thanks for having me at your studio. Yeah. Well, there you have it. Matt Chung, everyone. Really interesting interview. Thoroughly nice guy. Main point I take from that is just the importance of being a nice guy, of being a good person to hang out with when you're not playing, which will be the majority of the time that you're at a gig with the band. You need to be a pleasant person to hang about with, and you need to be able to offer to help. And I shouldn't be needing to tell you guys this. You already know, but it reinforces how important it is. And it just shows that as much as putting the time in, getting really good at your instrument is important, it's also important to work on your own personal development and make sure that you're the best possible version of yourself. And it's that people are going to be hiring, not just your chops if you have them. So a huge thanks to Matt again for coming on the podcast. Massive thanks as well for inviting me to his studio and lending me some very sexy microphones to plug into my field recorder. Moving forward, we have only 2 episodes left in this series after this one. Episode 9 will be on the importance of getting contracts right and not basically signing a deal with the devil, literally as the case may be. And episode 10 will be a sort of season finale, which I'm currently planning, which I can't wait to record, which I haven't recorded yet. I probably should get round to that. But anyways, thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and share and Instagram and whatever it is that you're meant to do with podcasts. Still new to all this, but thank you so much for all the support I've had so far. Thank you for listening. Have a fantastic day / evening / drive home from your gig, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Big Gig Energy podcast. This is the bit where I'm obliged to fish for engagement and stuff, so you can find me on Instagram as Big Gig Energy, that's BIGGIGENERGY, or you can get in touch via email at biggigenergy@gmail.com. I'll link anything relevant in the show notes below, but otherwise, if you've had any thoughts on this episode or would be interested in some one-to-one coaching for yourself and or your band, feel free to get in touch. Otherwise, do all the usual social media stuff, I guess, and let's keep the discussion going. Many thanks as ever to all my supporters and collaborators, and as always, best of luck with your next big gig.